tenure of the worst Secretary of Homeland Security since the agency was formed has come to an end in spectacular and humiliating fashion. Kristi Noem, and we assume her special government friend Corey Lewandowski, are out. Fired today on Truth Social by Donald Trump, quote, "The current Secretary, Kristi Noem, who has served us well and has had numerous and spectacular results, especially on the border, will be moving to be special envoy for the Shield of the Americas," a thing I didn't know existed until today, "our new security initiative in the Western Hemisphere we are announcing on Saturday in Doral, Florida. I thank Kristi for her service at Homeland." He also announced her replacement. That would be current Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin, a guy who has been all over cable news in the past week for some reason, although we all know who else watches a lot of cable news. He may be no better, but tonight is for reflecting on the end of Kristi Noem's ignominious cabinet career.
So something just happened inside a courtroom in New York that could completely change the political landscape in America. A sitting president standing before a judge, being warned that the next time he breaks the rules, he could be sent straight to jail. Not fined, not warned again, jail, actual incarceration. And the moment the judge said it, the entire courtroom reportedly went silent, because everyone understood what that meant. We are now one step away from something that has never happened in American history. A judge putting a president of the United States behind bars. And the reason this situation has escalated this far is actually pretty shocking, because this wasn't one mistake. It wasn't even two. According to the court record, it has now happened 10 different times. 10 separate violations of a court order. 10 times the judge warned Trump to stop. 10 times Trump kept doing it anyway. And now the judge is making it very clear that the next step could be jail. So how did things escalate this far? What exactly did Trump do that pushed the court to the brink? And is the United States really about to witness something no legal system has ever had to deal with before? Because behind the scenes, officials are already preparing for the possibility that it might actually happen.
She made it 14 months, almost exactly as long as Cricket, the dear departed dog she bragged about shooting in her memoir. Kristi Noem's tenure is ending in complete humiliation. You could see from the look on her face this week as she was grilled by members of both parties, she very much looked like someone who knew she was in danger of losing her job. And you could be forgiven for finding it all satisfying, considering just how corrupt and vile DHS has been under Noem's watch.
That warning didn't come from a political opponent. It didn't come from cable news commentators. It came directly from the judge overseeing the trial. And when a judge says something like that in open court, it's not random. It means the court has already gone through a long list of escalating steps. And in this case, that list is pretty extraordinary. Because the situation started with something called a gag order. Now, gag orders are actually very common in high-profile trials. The idea is simple. When a case involves witnesses, jurors, and court staff, judges often restrict what the defendant can say publicly about those people. Why? Because the justice system depends on people feeling safe enough to participate. Witnesses have to testify without fear. Jurors have to deliberate without intimidation. Court staff have to do their jobs without being targeted online. So judges sometimes issue orders preventing defendants from attacking those individuals publicly. And that's exactly what happened in this case. But according to the court record, Trump repeatedly ignored that order. Not once, not twice, 10 times. And each time, the judge responded with penalties. First came warnings, then came fines, thousands of dollars in fines. But eventually the judge reached a conclusion that he put directly into a written court order. And the wording of that order is incredibly important, because the judge wrote that the fines are not serving as a deterrent. In other words, they weren't working. Trump kept doing it anyway.
In the Salvadoran gulag, where she deported hundreds of men with zero process, using them as props as they rotted behind her while the gold Rolex on her wrist glinted in the light. To staging elaborate photo ops of herself armed and on fast boats and joining raids to create social media content. To slandering Renee Good and Alex Preddy, Americans who were shot and killed in broad daylight on camera by her masked agents.
That sentence might sound technical, but legally, it's a huge deal. Because when a judge determines that fines are no longer working, the next enforcement tool is something much more serious: contempt of court penalties. And those penalties can include incarceration. Now normally, just the threat of jail is enough to make people comply. Most defendants stop immediately once a judge signals that possibility. But this situation is very different. Because Trump didn't stop, even after multiple rulings, even after repeated warnings, even after being held in contempt. And that's why the judge finally addressed him directly inside the courtroom. And what he said next may go down as one of the most remarkable moments in modern legal history. That sentence tells you everything about where this case stands. The judge made two things very clear. First, he does not want to jail a president, which makes sense. No American judge has ever had to make that decision before. But the second thing he said may be even more important. He said he has a duty to uphold the integrity of the legal system. And that duty, according to the judge, applies to everyone, even the president. Now, when legal experts read that statement, many of them immediately recognized what the judge was doing. He was laying the groundwork. Because when judges issue major rulings, they often build a legal record first. They document violations, they explain why lesser penalties failed, and they clearly warn the defendant what will happen next. That way, if the punishment escalates, the reasoning is already on the record. And in this case, the record is already extensive. 10 violations, multiple contempt rulings, written findings that fines didn't work, and now a direct warning about jail, which means legally, the judge has already prepared the justification. But here's where things get even more unusual. Because this situation doesn't just raise legal questions, it raises logistical ones too. That might be the most surreal part of the entire story, because officials are actually planning for the possibility that it could happen. Think about the practical reality of that situation. If a judge orders the president jailed, where does he go? What facility would even handle that? How would security work? What happens to the Secret Service agents who are legally required to protect the president at all times? These aren't theoretical questions anymore. They're real logistical problems that government agencies have to think about. And the fact that the New York Department of Correction has already acknowledged it publicly tells you something important. They're taking the possibility seriously. Because correctional systems don't prepare for events they think are impossible. They prepare for events they believe might actually happen. Which brings us to another major legal question people have been asking. Could a president even be jailed like this? Surprisingly, the legal answer is more straightforward than many people expect. Because this case doesn't involve presidential decisions or official government actions. The alleged violations involve personal conduct tied to a criminal trial over events that happened long before Trump was president. And under existing Supreme Court rulings, presidential immunity generally only applies to official acts performed while in office. Contempt of court for violating a gag order during a criminal trial? That's not an official act, which means legally, the judge may actually have the authority to enforce the order. Now, of course, if jail were ever ordered, Trump's legal team would immediately challenge it. Appeals would fly through the courts at lightning speed. The legal battle would be massive, but the possibility itself is real. And that's why this moment is so extraordinary. Because the entire country is now watching a situation where one more violation could trigger something unprecedented. One more social media post, one more attack on a witness, one more statement about a juror, and the judge could decide it crosses the line. If that happens, the next ruling could be historic. A contempt order sending a sitting president to jail. So that's where things stand right now. 10 violations already on the record. A judge saying the fines didn't work. A direct warning that jail is now the next step. And government agencies quietly preparing for the possibility that it might actually happen. No playbook exists for this situation. No precedent tells us exactly how the system would respond. Courts would move. Appeals would explode, political pressure would skyrocket, and the entire country would be watching in real time. Because at the center of all of this is one fundamental question. Does the rule of law apply to everyone the same way? Or are some people simply too powerful to face the same consequences as everyone else? That's the question Judge Merchan now appears ready to answer. And according to his own words, he already knows what his duty is. Now the only thing left to see is whether Trump pushes the court far enough to force that decision. Because if that happens, the next moment inside that New York courtroom could become one of the most historic legal events the United States has ever seen.